Hey everybody, this is Tech for Humans, and today we're doing a tutorial on tiling textures. Now before we really get into what that means, or excuse me, how to do it, we're going to want to talk about what that actually means as a process. So a tiling texture, if we go up here to Filter, Other, Offset, you can see that no matter how much I offset this image, right, and we're just offsetting the pixels, you can never see a seam or an edge where things don't line up. If you compare and contrast this to, let's say, this rock texture here, if we were to go back and do the exact same thing, we go to Filter, Other, Other, Offset, and start offsetting it, you can see some very obvious seams, right? This image doesn't tile. This one does. Now this one has some artifacts in it. It's not so hot. So for instance, right here, it has a little bit of shadows caused by the initial light directions that these were taken under. And so you have to be a little bit picky with the textures that you work from. Probably the most important thing, if you are going to be taking your own reference pictures, which really you should always be taking them on a cloudy day or where there is indirect light. You're also going to want to make sure that when you are taking your pictures, let's say we have the wall here and the ground's here and you're standing right here, you want to have as wide an angle as possible on your camera. Zoom all the way out as much as possible and then get as close as you realistically can to the wall and make sure that you have no flash. Snap your camera, right? That way you get as wide an image as possible. You're not super zoomed in on the little details. You want to be getting the broad surface as much as you can. Now even when you do that, I'm just going to go ahead and close this awful image here. Nope, we're not going to save that. Even when you do that, you do have some distortion, and let me show you what I mean by that. This image right here looks pretty cool. It's a little bit small for my tastes, but you'll notice that as you get to the edges, really crisp here, and it starts to get really blurry here. The reason you want to take these pictures and get as wide an angle as you can is because widening that angle decreases the amount of blurring that you can get. So realistically, you'll be working in a region on this texture, that's a circle, on this texture about, maybe this big in reality. That's as much as you're going to be able to work with. So we won't work with the entire image, and you can't take that much of an image. So you really want to make sure that your main focus is in this area here. That being said, we also want to make sure that we're getting as much detail out of this as possible. This would not make a good texture because there's so much variation in here, and when you're making a tiling texture you don't want that. And let me explain what I mean by that. This is a texture that I actually made this back in college years ago, and for a single texture that doesn't have to tile, this is a great image for metal. I find it works really well, it's attractive, it has variation on it, and it's everything that you don't want a tiling texture to be, realistically. And I didn't realize that back in college. But frankly, I don't think this would have been as good texture for what I use it for if I had known that back then. But let me explain. Let's go in and we'll go to Define Pattern. This is going to allow us to take this image and make it a tiling pattern in our layer effects. We'll unlock this back layer and we're going to add a layer style, which is just a pattern overlay. We're going to pick our pattern, right? Okay, we're going to go back and we're going to make this thing repeat. Okay, right here, you can tell this image is repeating badly. There's two ways that you can do that. First off, let's just go ahead and hit OK here for the moment, and we'll create a new layer to work on. Alright, very good. I'll just switch to white so it's a little bit easier to see, and draw here. You have some very clear areas of banding, right? There are strong dark bands, and you can even argue that there are strong white bands here. And that's not good, right? We want a nice clean image that's really hard to tell. And at the same time, there's also splotches, right? That's right here, these big bright spots and these deep dark spots. And these things are so profound and they're so big, they actually create those lines. We don't want that in a tiling texture. So with what we're going to work on, we're going to remove those tiling textures. Let's talk about a few other references that are not the best to work with. This, very clean image, very clean capture from the edges, right? Doesn't get that blurry, but there's a strong washed out light direction. It's coming straight down, but it's really wrecking this image. This is not a lost image, but there's these strong shadows just right in here and here and deeply in here, and we don't want these. As cool as these features are, it's better to keep this image as a reference image, right, and apply these bits of texture later in such a way, well, frankly, across the tiling texture to add roughness later. But that's a tutorial for another day. So we'll just go ahead and get rid of those. And we'll just close that image because I don't think we need that anymore. Alright, now you also want to avoid strong light directions at an angular level. Right, this one is getting a strong light direction from over here, and it's creating this really dark area here. Now it is possible to get rid of this darkened region here, and if you don't believe me that that's there, we'll just undo this really quick, and we'll do a brightness contrast, and we'll just up that contrast. See how strong that is, how much more pronounced that is now. It's gonna get worse, and it's very tricky to get rid of that, so we're not going to bother with this texture either, as much as it is, don't get me wrong, a nice texture. Alright, one for later. Now this one is obviously bad for obvious reasons. This one I considered doing, I really did, because it's big enough, but and I could work with it. I mean, these artifacts here, I could get rid of these. Even the areas of the strong shadow, I can get rid of these. So let's say that I'm trying to make a 512 image, right? I can go to my masks or my marquee tools. I can set a fixed size. I'm going to go with 512. All right, you know what? Let's just do 1024 because that's more common these days. 1024. Back when I first started doing this, 512 was like, really big, and 1024s were just to be used with extreme caution, but not so much anymore. Oops, 1024. So this one really still wouldn't work with a 1024, right? Because it's so big. I mean, I could kind of make it work, but this image suffers from that blurriness at the edges, and we could make this image work, but we're not going to. We're going to actually use one for my own personal reference library for one other really important reason. Let me tell you why that is. I don't own the rights to this image. I didn't take this image. I got this image off the internet, and I shouldn't use it professionally. Now, I may use it to show you how to get rid of a few things, such as right here, these large things here. This is the patch tool. If you hold down on the healing brush tool, you go down to patch tool, you can simply outline it, drag and replace. Oop. And you can simply drag and replace, and it's gone, right? And it looks pretty darn good. Like, you can't really tell anything was there. But I simply don't own this image. So while I may use this for techniques, I would never use this professionally in a job environment because I don't know where this image came from. I didn't take it. So we're going to be using this one. I did, in fact, take this image up on the North Shore in Duluth, and it's okay. It was a little bit bright for my taste, but I think that it will work for our purposes here. So the first thing that I'm going to do with this image is I'm going to go ahead with my marquee set again to fixed size with the 1024 by 1024, and look at that. That's just huge. In fact, I'm going to grab more of this image. I'm going to go ahead and just use a regular normal size one because this image is so big, and I think I'll probably provide this one as a link down in the description. I'm going to hold down shift, I'm going to drag across and just grab a big area, as big as I can realistically grab, right in here. And I'm looking for an even distribution of light as much as possible. I know that there's some darkening over here, and maybe we'll have to get rid of that, as well as this artifact here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Image and Crop. If you just want to use shortcuts, you can go Alt-I and then P. And this isn't bad. This is, in fact, I would say pretty darn good. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-D to deselect. Right, and I am a big shortcut fan, big fan of shortcuts, so I hope you are too. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out exactly how big is this image. This image is under image size, under pixels, 1908. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this down to a more manageable number. I'm going to pick 1800 because I know I can work with that, and hit OK. So I'm going to be using 1800 because I know that 1800 divided by 2 is 900. So when I go to offset this under Filter, again, Other, Offset, I can just plunk in 900, and automatically we get half of our width and transition. Let me just make sure I'm streaming this properly. Looks good. Alright. Now, there is an obvious seam running down the middle here, and it's not great looking. And there's things that we want to do to get rid of some of these larger assets. Again, we can go and use the patch tool to get rid of this section here, and that works pretty good, right? And I'm just being kind of broad, and it just goes away, which is awesome. But for the center area, the center line, I want to use something with a bit more control. I'm going to use my clone stamp tool. Now the clone stamp tool, sure you can see my brush all right, is a powerful tool, but it needs to be used properly. We need to make sure that the settings are a hardness of about 90 or so. We want a little bit of hardness, not a ton. It should be a nice round brush. And the size should be, for my size of the image, I'm going for something in the range of 45, because I want it to be big but not too big, because if we use too big of a brush, we're going to end up destroying a lot of the detail here that we really want to preserve. Now, a common problem that happens with this brush is you click and it says could not use the clone stamp tool because the area to clone has not been defined. Alt-click to determine a source point. And people look at that and go, I don't know what to do. Well, it tells you what to do. Alt-click to define a source point. Source point is saying I want to clone this area here. All right, I clicked and you see how underneath my cursor it's actually showing me what that area is going to look like. And I can draw in, and you see how there's that little mark where I originally marked relative. I'm just cloning in everything that was there. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to identify, let me switch to my brush tool here. I'm trying to identify areas of obvious difference, right? So right in here is an area that with my, finely trained eye, I can tell that there's going to be some difference. So when I start cloning, I'm going to start cloning from here. I'm just going to reset my clone position. I'm going to fill in this area right here all the way up to my clone line. If I have an artifact, that's okay. I can just stamp it away, right? But that's how we get rid of our seams. Now, you kind of have to keep track of where you worked and where you haven't. And for right now, we're just going to avoid the top area here somewhat, because that will end up in the middle at a later time. We don't want to hit these edges if we can help it. So I'm just going to target those areas. Again, here's another one of those areas. So when I clone over this, we're just going to get rid of it just like that. And we're going to continue on getting rid of those areas. Right? Now in this case, I kind of want to go the other direction because this area over this line is a little bit darker than I want it to be. Right? Okay. Same thing over here. But we should be more or less getting rid of that line. You want to zoom in as much as possible and make sure that you've fully gotten rid of it and that everything is gone. And this looks pretty good. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go into Filter, Other, Offset again. We're going to leave this at 900 because that's going to, we're going to hit that as 0. That means that from where we were, 0, it's going to leave this in the middle, which is where we want it, right? We're going to go to 900 on the vertical, and that means that we now have a little area here and a wide area here to get rid of. So what we'll do is the same thing. We'll just set our target and identify those areas that just don't look quite right, and we'll just focus on cleaning up this edge first, and that will be just fine. Okay, and then we will mop over these areas here. So this area is very different, this area here especially, so I'm going to go ahead and just generously clone that out as we go. Now I am using a graphics tablet. If you're using a mouse, this is going to be a trickier process. If you're going to be working with any kind of texture work, and heck, Photoshop in general, you really should be working with the graphics tablet when it comes to fine detail work such as texturing. But you know, to each their own. If you are really committed to working without any kind of tablet or assistance like that, hey, good on you. I would never try it myself. So we'll just continue cloning out here. Highly opinionated, I realize that. I hope you're not gonna get mad at me over just that type of opinion. I think that it's fair enough to feel that way. So, unless you've used a graphics tablet and you really hate one, in which case I understand that too. Alright, we're gonna offset this one more time, and we're gonna offset it back to our original configuration. So we're gonna go 900 on the horizontal and 0 on our vertical, and this should put it back to where it originally was, right? And there's just this center line right here, this little area in the middle where we just have to get rid of that, and we are good. See, isn't that nice? Now, we're not necessarily done yet. There's one more step that we should probably do, because this will likely still have some banding and some splotching in it, believe it or not. And we can identify that early on without going through a big, long, complicated process by using what's called a gradient map. A gradient map can be added. We're just going to make sure our layer is selected. Click here, and we're going to select gradient map. Alright. Now I like to pick something a little higher contrast. I like to go with a blue-orange. And you might go, okay, that looks great. It's orange and blue. We're just going to go ahead and tighten this. Right down here on these lower flags, just a bit, until we can kind of get a sense of the shapes that are made up by the difference in our light versus our dark. Right there we go. There's a pretty good variation. Okay, so we can see some structures right in here that are very bright, some structures that are very dark, and that's okay. We'll go ahead and hit OK. We'll collapse this. Now, for the record, your image has not changed. Right? It's the same thing as over here. Everything is fine. This is just a way to visualize. So I'll reselect my background layer, and I will control click on an area that I feel like is, you know, what I would prefer the brightness to be. And I'll just go through and start mopping that away. Right? Just restructuring, and this is where you can really see what your clone brush is doing and the difference that you're making. So this allows you a bit more control, allows you to visualize it without getting caught up in the what is my texture actually made out of. And if you're worried that you might be going too far with it, you can always go over, hide your layer style, and move on, right? So this is going well, actually. So we'll just keep on cloning out these regions here and gutting these out, and we're just breaking down these brighter areas, which would be contrast in our image. This is what causes that banding and splotching in our images, which is entirely undesirable. And so we want to get rid of that as much as we possibly can, to a degree. I mean, if you could go to town with this process and overwork it, and all you would do is really just destroy your original image and make it fairly blurry. But this is a very consistent image right now. It's working pretty well. Now, to be sure, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to offset this again. Right? And I'm going to offset this. I'm going to offset this on the vertical because I was picking up a few, I don't know, oddities that I wasn't totally sure about, particularly in this region here. So it's good to just go in and make sure that you're being consistent throughout this entire structure as much as possible. And these are those areas of contrast. Really, these are the areas that are going to show up even at far away distances, and really this is what causes that banding and splotching, which is the high contrast between one area and another. So we're just working to get rid of that. So this would be another dark area where I would want to, as much as possible, just add in a little bit of variance, just to kind of make it a bit more uniformly noisy. And we're just going through here like so. Looks good. Alright, that's looking nice. Okay, so that is one tiling texture down, except for one last thing. We need to shrink this down to a power of 2. Powers of 2 fit nicely in images, and they are extremely useful. Now, we always want to compress our images or shrink them down rather than make them big. So we'll go to Image, Image Size, and we will break this down to a 1024 image on every side and hit OK. Now, you may or may not be satisfied with this image. Like, this image frankly looks a little washed out. There are a few things that you can do to make your image slightly more interesting. Is you can go ahead and duplicate it just by dragging it down to the new layer icon. And you can set the top to something like multiply, and that'll give you a much more varied, deep color rich option. If you want to fade that back, knock it back a little bit, you can do so just by messing with the opacity. Otherwise, there are other things that you can do, such as hue saturation and things like that, but I like to keep my textures fairly neutral and as close to the original as possible. So that'll do it for this particular aspect of a tiling texture. The other thing we're going to do is talk about a bonus alpha. An alpha image is basically taking an area and eliminating this. Now, I found this image on the internet. I'm going to make no bones about that. But when I want to make a proper alpha, there's a couple things I need to do. An alpha image is basically, only including areas of the image that we want, right? So if we want to catch this sewer grate, we only want the metal, not the concrete, or maybe the cracks and not the concrete. So here's what we do. The easiest thing that you can do is probably go to the crop tool. That's probably the best place to start. So we're going to crop this out, and I'm going to grab just these areas. I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to go to, where is it? Hang on. I'm sorry, we're going to go to our perspective crop tool. My bad. And this will give us the ability to grab the edges or the corners of these, right? And just set this image right. And we're just trying to line these up horizontally so that we're getting a little bit of the cracks and not a lot of the concrete there, right? Okay. Now, the cool part about this is once you've got it lined up properly, you've got as much of the cracks and the edges as you want, but not the concrete, you hit enter, and it will actually re-rotate the image for you, which is really handy. Next thing I'm going to do is double click to unlock the background image. That's in the empty space here. That should be layer 1. Now I'm going to go to the canvas size and just increase the canvas size by a little bit. This is a very, very, very small image, so I'm going to go and call this 300 on either side, right? The next thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and start erasing at full opacity with my nice hard brush, right, full hardness, the bits of concrete around this image, right? Again, this is a very low resolution image, but it's just demonstrating the technique here, right? We're just going to round that right off like so. And we're getting rid of, again, the concrete, but not the darkness of the crack as much as possible. We want that as much as we can get, right? Just be gentle. Okay. Now, what does that get us? Well, I'll show you. So I can take this image, hit V, and drag it over to my image that I've been working on, and drag it right in, and look at that. It automatically looks like it's kind of embedded in the ground. There's other details that we would need to do to make this work, but that's basically what an image alpha is for, and that's the quick way to make one, just if you want to create a tiling effect for your images. Just go ahead and decrease the darkness there, and so on. So that's everything. If you have any questions about this, leave a comment. If you like what you see, go ahead and hit subscribe if you want to see, again, more videos like this, and I'm always taking requests down in the comments. Otherwise, have yourselves a great day, and we will see you next time.